program that tracks telephone and internet records is targeting your personal, is it actually targeting your personal information? Or, as the Minister of Defense, Peter McKay, said in the House, is the program mainly focused only on foreign threats, and is the law being followed? MPs talked about this earlier. Joining me now, let's get a different perspective. Joining me now is CBC security and intelligence expert, the former assistant director of intelligence at CSIS, Ray Boisvert. And with me in the studio is Michael Geist, the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law at the University of Ottawa, who's been writing about this. Good to see both of you. Ray, let me start with you. First of all, the question period I'd love an answer for. The opposition was asking Peter McKay, does the Canadian government have access to this specific computer program called Prism that the U.S. has used to monitor their citizens? Does Canada have access to that?
Well, the Americans and other key allies in the Five Eyes group, which is New Zealand, Australia, the UK, and the United States and Canada, share intelligence. If there are leads generated through Prism or any other type of service or any type of other activity, it will be shared if it relates to the nationals of your country. Otherwise, the actual mechanics behind it is usually quite close-hold by whatever government developed the capability.
All right, let me just ask you what Canadians want to know. I mean, you're a former CSIS guy. Is there a Prism-style system here in Canada? In other words, is the government looking at the same kind of data on Canadians that the Americans are looking at Americans?
I have no doubts that this is just a reflection of the new reality, Evan. Years ago, back in the 50s and 60s, people were annoyed or quite upset by the fact that cops were climbing up a telephone pole with some alligator clips and listening on a personal conversation, judicially authorized or not. This is all about trying to identify if somebody among us is in contact with a serious threat actor. The only way to do that in this broad, interconnected digital world where threat actors aren't just meeting in a small cafe or in a small social club where they're planning to maybe blow up somebody's nightclub or to get involved in a racketeering thing. They're planning very complex cyber espionage operations or deep terrorist events, and we're going to have to get at them through connectivity involving anonymous data.
Okay, but you're saying, so it's right, so you're confirming that the government would be doing it. They have a justification for it, but let's just get it on the record. They're doing it.
All agencies who have authorized warrants to conduct the intercepted communications capture a whole bunch of data. And they also do that internationally through signals intelligence of stuff that's outside of Canadian jurisdiction in the sense of what would restrict CSIS and the RCMP to do investigations in Canada. Any data like that that comes to their attention, perhaps given by another agency, or the metadata from their own intercepts, can be looked at, and of course they do analysis using data analytics to try to find connections to others. Sure. In the Boston plot, you're always looking for that other cell that nobody knew anything about. It's the unknown that drives people in those businesses to sleepless nights.
All right, so let me bring in Michael, guys. When you're listening to that and you're hearing what Peter McKay has said about this, what's your view?
Well, what I just heard is that we do it. We monitor. Canadians are being monitored in this way, that there is information sharing such that when people like the minister say, don't worry Canadians, we don't track you, we only track foreigners, and his counterparts in the United States say, don't worry people in the United States, we don't track you, we're just tracking foreigners. Essentially what they're both saying is that everybody is being tracked. And while there's undoubtedly value in that information in targeting some of the cells we just heard about, when we get revelations that the NSA is collecting 97 billion pieces of data on a monthly basis, building a $2 billion data warehouse to mine this information, they're not just tracking those small cells, they're tracking everybody.
All right, the National Defense Minister Peter McKay is signing off on this. Michael, guys, let me stay with you. Would it include phone records of, let's say, Bell or Rogers or TELUS? People, because we're throwing around this term metadata, and just define what you think the parameters of all this would include.
Well, the metadata can be more revealing than the content of the conversation itself. When we're talking about metadata, we've had a number of experts take a look at this. We're talking about, say, in a cell phone context, your geographic location, what were the cell phone towers you were using, so where did you happen to be located, who were you calling, how long was that phone call take place, how frequent were those phone calls, and then, of course, if you're tracking it all, you're tracking the people you called, who did they call? And so suddenly what you're able to do is create quite a map of your connections, their connections, creating a very large graph of all of this kind of connectivity and communication that takes place, information that can, in a sense, be more revealing than anything you might have said on the call itself.
Ray Boisvert, I want you to weigh in on this, but McKay's office released a statement, and I think it's worth showing our audience. As the communications security establishment, CSE works to keep Canadians secure. It does so knowing strict legislation protects the individual's right to privacy. The activities of the organization are reviewed annually and are found to comply with the law. But if you listen to what Michael Geist is saying, now what we're learning, how are those rights protected? How can you be assured that any information gleaned from Canadians is purged or not shared? And how do you know if you're being tracked or not tracked?
Well, first of all, I have a lot of difficulty with this kind of discussion, mostly because it usually gets way off track. We have to separate the fact from the fiction. In other words, what are they doing it and how they're doing it? And in that, I actually even object to the reference to being tracked. All of this is, by its very nature, the billions upon billions of small little bits and pieces of data are extremely anonymous only because they're filtered not by people but by machines. And only when that person somehow becomes in contact with somebody who is a serious threat actor, in other words, if I'm in contact by email with somebody like Anwar al-Awlaki, the sheikh out of Yemen who was recently targeted and killed by American forces, that would make me somebody who may then eventually become tracked. But until then, it's just the numbers. It's just numbers.
I agree. But is it, Michael, is it just numbers? I mean, there is this thing, if you haven't done anything wrong, why worry? But some people say, I don't want to be watched.
Well, I think that's the way most people feel. We're not talking about public spaces. We're talking about, in many instances, private conversations. We're talking about people's everyday activity, literally hundreds of times a day as you reach out, communicate with any number of people. And to think that all of that information is being captured and then in many instances being shared with other intelligence agencies, because of course that's the entire purpose, I think is deeply troubling. And that to simply say, well, you don't have to worry about it, we're not tracking our people. I mean, we canceled this program, as from what we can tell, a couple of years ago, specifically because we, in a sense, thought it was illegal. We couldn't have the assurance that it was non-Canadians. And yet a couple of years later, we've started it again around the same time as perimeter security starts coming up with the United States. You know, what changed that suddenly now we instituted a program that previously we felt couldn't comply with the law?
Ray, in the U.S., as you know, this surveillance program, Prism, of phone and internet activities created a huge reaction. The whistleblower, Edward Snowden, who has been on television today, was once on a 3-month contract with the National Security Agency. He's now leaked details of the program, came forward. He's now holed up in Hong Kong, as I say. The program was purportedly only, as Michael was saying, for monitoring foreigners. But I guess the question is, you know, is this more normative than we thought? You're saying, look, this is typical of security agencies. Are we basically now just learning, because of this Snowden guy, that the U.S. and Canada do this all the time in the name of security, but maybe we ought to have a debate as to how far security is going?
Well, first of all, we don't know exactly what's gone on. We have a series of slides. We have allegations from one guy. But I can tell you as a former practitioner that data matters, absolutely, so I'm not denying any of that. I think the big thing was, and what gave me greater comfort was, we're still, when I was there, and it's still continuing to this day, I suspect, it's all about targeting those persons once you have cause, which means that there's been some sort of element in the investigation or some sort of lead that's generated out of anonymous data that links a person to something serious.
Hang on, but you're running over this anonymous data. I guess the rubber hits the road here. And I'm not, maybe it's less surprising to you from the public's point of view. How are you generating this, what you're calling anonymous data, what Michael might characterize it differently? How are you getting all that data before you get actionable information and intelligence to go after someone? Are you getting it by essentially, you know, I look at my phone, is someone keeping the data when I get on the phone here?
Well, this is, again, what I just said earlier about separating fact from fiction. In the CSIS context, which is the only one I know specifically, that kind of data was generated from lawful investigations and lawful intercepts involving warrants from the Federal Court of Canada. Through that, numbers of persons were intercepted who were targeted as per the specific elements of the warrant. Data is generated, and that stuff would be mined. So that's very lawful. And there's nothing that should be surprising to anybody. The Prism thing is a very different story. It's a very different ball of wax. It involves signals intelligence. That means persons who are working in the global international communications infrastructure to look for links and mine data. And in that, they're, again, not looking at individuals. Nobody pops up on the radar until they've actually been in contact with a serious threat person. And that's a big comfort zone for me.
Michael, I got to leave it there, but last question to you. What are your concerns going forward? I mean, you're hearing the justification from the government. What's your concerns going forward on this issue?
Let's be clear, there are no denials that it takes place. In fact, no apologies that it takes place. And we've moved to an environment when we can see this massive surveillance infrastructure where all phone calls are literally tracked, and people, and at least within government in the United States and perhaps here as well, they think that's totally acceptable. I think we need answers. We need answers as to what changed from a couple of years ago to now, that suddenly now the government moved back into a program that previously was offside. What is the involvement of the Canadian telecommunications companies? We know Verizon's involved in the U.S. Does Bell and TELUS provide the same kind of information directly to Canadian authorities in the same way? And what kind of oversight is there? Who's watching the watchers as part of this? Because what we've essentially got are secret directives leading to secret orders, leading to secret disclosures, and a whole lot of secrecy with very little transparency and openness about what's actually happening.
All right. This is a discussion I have a feeling we're going to have again. Ray Bovaert, who is our security and intelligence expert, and Michael Geist, professor at University of Ottawa. Good to have the both of you on the show.
Thanks.